A few years ago, I needed to find an internship to progress in my education. After putting in too much effort, I couldn't secure a place at that time, and I needed to get a job to ensure that I provide for my family. Through my wife's family, I learned that a friend of theirs owned a transport company, a sort of taxi service for transportation. He needed someone to cover the night shift since the bus had to be on call for at least 24 hours a day. Being a natural night owl, I immediately expressed interest in the job. Fortunately, I was hired. After obtaining the necessary license, the work was fairly straightforward. Pick up passengers, drop them off at their destinations, and occasionally use a machine to help lift the elderly up or down the stairs. During downtime, when there were no scheduled trips, I would drive to a designated waiting area and pass the time there. I quickly found that there was a truck stop in the area where I could park and catch some sleep while waiting for trips. Nearby, there was a gas station where I would grab coffee in the early hours of my shift. On the opposite side of the truck stop, across the gas station's parking lot, stood a rundown restaurant with a motel attached to it. To avoid disturbing the sleeping truckers if I got a call in the middle of the night, I usually parked near the restaurant. After parking there night after night, I began to notice something strange. One particular motel room had a constant flow of people coming and going. At first, I thought it was nothing of it, but one night, towards the end of winter, while I was half asleep with my window slightly open, I suddenly heard yelling from the motel. A man came tumbling out of the room, sprinting away in a panic. Just seconds later, a much larger man stormed out after him, gripping something in his hand. In the dim light, I couldn't make out what it was. I hesitated for a moment, debating whether I should get involved, but ultimately decided it wasn't my business. So I went back to my half-sleeping state, waiting for my next call. Not much time passed before my phone went off. I had a trip scheduled an hour away. I started the bus and was pulling out of the parking lot when I spotted the big guy from earlier rounding the corner. The rest of the night was a blur of back-to-back trips, and I didn't get a chance to return home until around 3 a.m. When I finally arrived at the parking lot, I noticed that the area where I usually parked was littered with fist-sized rocks. At the time, I didn't think much of it. I just parked a few spots over and settled in to wait for my next call. Exhausted, I fell asleep almost immediately, but I was suddenly jolted awake by the blaring sound of a car horn. A vehicle was parked right in front of my bus, flashing its high beams and revving its engine aggressively. At first, I thought it was some random person who had noticed me sleeping, and thought it would be funny to mess with. Annoyed, I jumped out of the bus, ready to tell them off. But instead of driving away or stopping, the driver started inching forward and braking repeatedly, almost as if they were warning me to leave. That's when everything clicked. Not wanting to stick around and find out what was going on, I made the smart choice. I got back in the bus, locked the doors, and prepared to leave. Not wanting to seem like a pushover, I stood my ground and stared at the car. Not that I could actually see anything with its high beams nearly blinding me. After what felt like an eternity, but was probably no more than 30 seconds, the car finally drove off. From that night on, I decided to park near the trucks for safety. A month passed and nothing else happened. I figured that as long as I kept parking by the trucks, I wouldn't have any more issues. Then, one Sunday night, I had a grueling 12-hour shift from 6 p.m. to 6 a.m. I hadn't had time to eat dinner before work, and the first half of my shift was packed with back-to-back trips, leaving me no time to grab a bite. When I finally got a return trip back to my home zone, I quickly parked at the far end of the nearly empty truck stop, eager to eat the late dinner my wife had packed for me. Wanting to relax, I decided to watch some TV on my phone while I ate. I shifted into a comfortable position, leaning my back against the driver's side door. As I settled in, I accidentally hit the door lock with my elbow, which, in hindsight, turned out to be a stroke of luck. As I sat there scrolling through my phone, I suddenly heard the clack of the door handle behind me. Instantly alert, I snapped back into position and quickly turned to look. That's when I saw him. A man who had pulled his head was crouching beside the bus. Before I could fully process what was happening, he dropped to the ground and began crawling underneath the vehicle. In his right hand, he clutched a massive kitchen knife. Panic shot through me. I shot up from my seat, double-checking that the other two doors were locked. My heart pounded as I scanned the area, trying to spot him. But he was still under the bus and wasn't about to step outside, not with that knife making his intentions painfully clear. Thinking fast, I turned on the engine and switched on the rear floodlights, hoping to startle him. Thankfully, it worked. I watched as he bolted from beneath the bus, sprinting toward the wooded, bushy area at the far end of the truck stop. I didn't wait around to see where he went. That was the last time I ever parked there. From that night on, I made sure every door was locked every single time I was parked.